The first time America saw nuclear power was through the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. This sparked fear and created controversy surrounding nuclear energy. But what if we told you this power can be used to power our homes?
So, how exactly does nuclear energy work? Nuclear energy works when uranium 235 is put in a reactor. This reactor then undergoes nuclear fission, the process of splitting the uranium. This splitting apart causes energy to be released that heats up the water and then powers up the wind turbines.
The Manhattan Project led to the development of the atomic bomb, which would ultimately result in the death of hundreds of thousands in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Seeing the deadly potential of this technology, the Truman Atomic Energy Act was established in 1946. It would prohibit the use of this technology beyond government defense applications, like building nukes. This would all change with the Atomic Energy Act of 1954, which would allow for the private sector to use nuclear technology for civilian applications. This was a direct result of the Atoms for Peace initiative, which was a push to use nuclear technology for public needs such as abundant energy rather than weapons such as nukes. In 1979, America's worst nuclear accident occurred at 3 Mile Island, which was a nuclear power plant near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. It was a near disaster of human error, which would forever change the public's perception of nuclear power. It didn't destroy a city, but it exposed flaws in how emergency response was conducted, leading to the formation of the Institute of Nuclear Power Operations, or the INPO. For the next 3 decades, the accident effectively halted the construction of new nuclear plants in America, illustrating the public distrust that the next incident that we'll talk about is Chernobyl. On April 26, 1986, the entire world witnessed the world's most catastrophic nuclear disaster, which occurred at Chernobyl. A critical error would lead to the partial meltdown of the reactor core, but ultimately the containment building performed its job. Chernobyl was that what-if scenario that many opponents feared. It solidified the image of nuclear power as an inherently dangerous technology in people's minds. It showed that this technology could cause unprecedented environmental and human devastation. However, beyond that, it showed the world that a poorly regulated and poorly controlled industry could pose a huge risk to the world, and this is Fukushima. This was the first time that a natural catastrophe triggered a major nuclear incident. The cause of it was a massive magnitude 9.0 earthquake, followed by a tsunami with ginormous waves that exceeded the height of the plant's walls. Fukushima reintroduced that highly improbable high-impact risk. Fukushima showed that even plants built to the most rigorous standards could be overwhelmed by natural forces. It forced a global reassessment of existing plants, where many pushed for stress tests and design changes to guard against tsunamis, earthquakes, and prolonged station blackouts from lost electrical power. Fukushima even prompted several countries like Germany to accelerate plans to phase out nuclear power entirely. For the analysis portion, we're going to discuss the two sides to this nuclear energy controversy, which is the opponents and the proponents.
So, what do those against nuclear energy have to say about it? Well, they say it causes a lot of long term serious issues. For example, Gerald Frankel, a materials engineer professor at Ohio State, researched how the US was trying to contain all their nuclear waste in Nevada. Ultimately, this didn't happen though, as Congress disapproved in 2011, and now all that nuclear waste is scattered across the country, each one managed by a company that produced it in the first place. Now, considering how much distrust we have in the private sector today, do we really expect us to trust these companies for millennia, even when the nuclear factories are decommissioned? So another problem that comes is in terms of time and the money needed to produce these plants. In Illinois, the state that has the most nuclear power plants in the US, an environmental council member there, Jennifer Walling, states that it takes around 6 to 8 years in order to produce a plant, excluding the extra 5 years in order to get licensing. In total, this would mean up to 13 years without nuclear energy. And when you have companies like Google producing these products that take a lot of energy, it seems very hard to wait that long in order to gain an energy source.
So nuclear energy has so many cons, as Tim mentioned earlier. Why is it still advocated so much amongst this controversy? Well, there's a couple of key reasons. Well, to consider the pros of nuclear energy, let's walk over to the chalkboard here. So the first thing we notice is the operating capacity of nuclear energy. According to the World Nuclear Association, this sits at around 80% as of 2024, which is extraordinary compared to coal or solar, which generally sit at no more than 30 to 40%. Now that we've got our first pro out of the way, let's talk about our second one, namely the current safety metrics of nuclear energy. As of right now, it sits at 0.07 deaths per terawatt hour, whereas for other sources like gas, coal, or oil, this can sit at numbers ranging from 5 all the way up to 24. This means that contrary to what skeptics believe, nuclear energy is actually very safe when you look at it on a production basis. Now that we've got our second pro out of the way, let's go to our third one, which is the carbon-free nature of nuclear energy. This is a pretty well-known fact that nuclear energy produces carbon-free emissions. And in fact, it goes as far as to say that 1/2 of all carbon-free emissions in the US are from nuclear energy, which means that it's contributing very positively to the environment, regardless of what many people have to say about its waste. And now that we've got our third pro out of the way, let's talk about our fourth and final one. And this one I would say is the most important pro. That is the energy density that comes from nuclear energy. One single uranium pellet, which is the size of an eraser, literally this big, it contains as much energy as nearly 1 ton of coal or 149 gallons of oil. I meant coal, sorry. And this goes to show how powerful nuclear energy can be in the fight for energy abundance, when things like AI data centers are showing to consume a lot of energy. So now we've discussed and analyzed the history behind the controversy behind nuclear energy. Now that leaves us the question, where are we in the present or the future? So what we've noticed over the past couple of years is that the popularity of nuclear energy is rising. 61% of adults believe that nuclear energy is the way to go. And so do companies such as Microsoft and Google, who have expressed their interests in expanding their nuclear power plant portfolio in order to power their energy demands. The next thing we could see right now is a shift towards SMR technology. SMRs are smaller and more easily to deploy than old school power plants, which maybe took, as Tim mentioned earlier, 10 to 13 years. These could only take a couple of years and are rapidly scalable for the energy needs of people and companies. And now that we've covered these other two, which are popularity and a shift towards SMR, let's talk about radioactive waste. This has traditionally been a big problem that we discussed earlier, where this radioactive waste that gets generated from nuclear power plants has to get stored in some underground facility that is far from the public. However, some companies are developing solutions where the radioactive waste that gets generated is being put back into the power plants to generate more energy later on. And this creates a sort of feedback loop and cycle where the radioactive waste that's generated is not necessarily bad, but is actually useful. So in conclusion, nuclear power has long been debated in terms of the risk it poses. However, with rising energy demands and the chaotic situation of worsening climate change, it begs the question, do we take the risk or do we pursue inaction while the world crumbles underneath us? What do you guys think?